All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight for NATRC's Let's Ride Seminar Series. This evening we're going to be discussing conditioning the equine athlete. It's more than LSD, and we are talking about long, slow distance. So I would like to introduce all of our panelists this evening, and they're going to give a little wave. First, we have from Region 4, Johnny Jewell, President's Cup winner and a multiple time completion of the Tevis Cup. Second, we have our current sitting president, Angie Marashnikov, from Region 1, just one, I believe. Yeah. So we'll give a good thumbs up there. Angie's been serving as our president. She brings lots of junior riders, has conditioned many horses in some interesting terrains out in the West. Third, we have Sarah Rennie. She is our current executive director. Sarah is also one of our horsemanship judges, and she has competed on many horses over many years and is also a Tevis Cup, has a Tevis Cup completion. And then we have Dr. Kay Gunkel. She is one of our NATRC members and veterinary judges from Region 3, and also has competed and won and earned national championships on her horses. And then myself, my name is Carrie Riddick. I'm a veterinarian in Region 5, and am just looking forward to talking this evening. So with that being said, we are going to kind of go into a little bit of just some definitions to familiarize yourselves a little bit with what we're talking about tonight. And Kay is going to talk about a little bit of this for us.
Can you flip it to the next slide?
Can you see the definitions or no?
Yes. You want to do the definitions? I can't see them, but.
Oh, okay. Can everybody else?
Yes, I can. Oh, okay. Well, I have the paper here, so I'm good. So the first one is LSD, and that stands for long, slow distance. And we'll go into that a little bit more in a little bit. Aerobic is a term used for the oxygenation in the muscles to generate energy. Anaerobic is an activity in which the body incurs where there's an oxygen debt. Cardiovascular refers to the heart and the blood vessels. Musculoskeletal refers to the muscles and the bones. And physiology relates to the way the body parts function. Anatomical relates to the body structure. Now, here we go through oxygen, how the body uses oxygen.
So, you know, I think that's a great question and a great topic to talk about, because a lot of what we are, you know, when we're thinking of conditioning the horse, when we're thinking of improving the horse as an athlete, this is all about oxygen use. So what happens is when, you know, the horse is eating, when they have their nutrition, the body is going to convert that to fuel for the body. This fuel is going to go through their cells, and in their cells, it's going to be converted to something called ATP, which is energy that the muscles are going to use. ATP is going to give oxygen to the muscles, and that is the source of energy for the muscles to be able to contract. We get muscle contraction, we are all moving forward. So there's a couple of ways that we are able to, organs that are going to be using oxygen utilization. And so the first is going to be the heart. And it's interesting because as the heart is improving in its athleticism and it's pumping more blood through the heart, more oxygenated blood arrives to the muscles. Okay, so conditioning for your cardiac output, which we'll talk about later, is going to be what is increasing oxygen to your muscles. As far as your lungs, that's another organ that is able to help us with with getting oxygen to tissues, right? We all need to breathe. Our horses are breathing. And so what happens is the lungs, they're distributing oxygen to the tissues. What I think is a super fun fact is once we get maximal oxygen uptake, what that means is with a healthy lung for the horse, they are actually able to take in more oxygen through a breath than what they can distribute through their muscles and their tissues. And that's, I think, a super huge goal to achieve with any athlete. And then third, we have this little organ in the abdomen, the abdominal cavity of the horse. It's called the spleen. And the spleen is a pretty cool organ. We don't usually think about it or talk about it, but the spleen is used to store extra red blood cells. And what is awesome about that is when we have exercise and stress on the body, the spleen actually contracts, it becomes smaller. And when it does that, it actually dumps extra red blood cells into the body. And so then now you have more of these little, wonderful red blood cells that are carrying oxygen to your muscles circulating throughout the horse's system. So, a lot of what we end up doing with our conditioning is increasing as the horse becomes more fit. They end up building more red blood cells, improved red blood cells, the spleen works, the heart and lungs become more fit. And after the heart and lungs become more fit, we see more oxygen getting to the muscles and the body's able to build that way. So that's kind of our basic way that the horse is going to build. So everybody kind of gets we're on the same kind of level playing field. One thing I think is important is to know what our normal vital signs are for horses. And Kay, what are those?
Uh-oh, you're muted.
Okay, so our normal vitals for the horse, and these are based on an adult horse that's over 2 years of age. The normal heart rate is 30 to 40 beats per minute. The normal temperature is 98.96 to 100.94. The respiratory rate is 10 to 20 breaths per minute. Mucous membrane should be a salmon pink color and moist to the touch. Capillary refill time should be less than 2 seconds. The skin tenting should also be less than 2 seconds. And we can go into those terms more if people need to.
Excellent. So one thing that I think is really interesting as we've had some discussions is long, slow distance trainings are just not, we have these programs, but they're just not all the same. And Johnny and Angie, would you please each touch on your approach to the LSD training programs? Johnny, would you like to go first?
Yeah. So we live in a rather flat area. So starting the new horses will be different than Angie, who has mountains. I take them out short rides. Now for me, that's 5 to 6 miles, mostly walking in the beginning, then starting to add sections of trotting slowly, and then we'll slowly build by either adding more distance or a quicker pace, but you never add both on the same ride, one or the other. I don't really have a set plan with my horses as to, so many days a week and the horse is going to do this, so many miles on this day. I kind of go on the feel of how the horse is doing, but generally 2 or 3 times a week we'll get out and let's see. As they're building up their fitness level, if I've got a ride coming up, then I'll add in a weekend ride where I'll try to go closer to the distance that the ride will be, but just occasionally on that. Once the horse is fit, after you've gone through all of your training program and they're fit, they take very little usually to stay fit. But I'm very kind of a simple, basic plan on mine. Angie, it's yours.
Okay, so I'm a little different in that I have a fairly structured approach. I spend a lot of time in the arena initially. So young horse or you know, experienced horse, they have to have a good solid hour in the arena a couple of days a week, depending on what they need to work on. There may be a lot of trotting, there may be a lot of cantering, there may just be obstacle work. And then once I feel like that hour is easy on the horse, then I go out on the trail and I plan on an 8-mile ride the first day, the first time out on the trail. Because I assume that with all the work I did in the arena, I probably did a good 3 or 4 miles each time in the arena. So then I have a structure where I plan on taking about 16 weeks to take a young horse with good muscle and bone from that 1 hour to ready for a ride. And so I will add about 4 miles every other weekend. And as Johnny does, that opposite weekend that I don't add the 4 miles, I'll make it faster. We'll do some trotting. We'll start off with just a little trotting in the first couple of weeks, and then we'll add into a lot of trotting, you know, when we get into that 8 or 9 week mark, so that by the time that 16 weeks come up, I'm 8 hours or 9 hours in the saddle. So we've really built up the horse's back, you know, that literally the time spent in the saddle for both, you know, myself and the horse. I have for now.
Well, thank you. I think, you know, it's so interesting how all horses, you know, they really adapt to set training programs, and it's great to know that there's a variety of programs that really can work for each horse. And I'm certainly curious, we all will, about what other, you know, competitors have done that has worked and what they find works. I think what's neat is all of this is what we're doing when we're thinking of the physiology, like why does this work? So whether you have an arena, whether you have, you know, long flat areas, whether you have hills, what's happening is we are stressing our horses. And so exercise is all about stress. And so when we are putting stress on the horse is either going to fail or they're going to improve in their performance. And so in this situation, when we're exercising our horses, this is a good stress that we're putting on them, right? We're not talking about a stress that's going to cause, you know, GI ulcers. We're talking about the kind that's going to build bone, build muscle, improve heart and lungs and fitness. Because both programs have discussed starting slowly, this allows the horse's bones to strengthen, their muscles to strengthen, and their cardiovascular systems to strengthen. This also can apply for young horses, and this also applies for horses that are coming out of a situation that they've been injured, where you start with short distances and frequent durations. So, you know, I think that's just, it's pretty amazing how the body will certainly adapt to this, because it doesn't want to get hurt. It doesn't want to, the body wants to make sure it's protected itself. And so it's going to protect itself by each time it's going to have some little injuries to itself. We're going to break down some muscle. We're going to build up some lactic acid. The horse is going to be sore. They're probably going to be a little uncomfortable. But what happens is their body says, I don't want that again. I'm now going to bring a matrix of more muscle. I'm going to put down, you know, more bone. Their tendons are going to, you know, become more thickened, more tough. So the next time we do 8 miles, the next time we do our 20 miles, they're in a better sense, they're stronger. So it's a neat way that the body kind of makes, you know, adapts to all this training. So the next way that I think is a neat thing to talk about is, you know, if we're going to do all of this long, slow distance and stress on our horses, you know, what can we do to specifically train our cardiovascular system? How can we make our heart and lungs, our horses' heart and lungs, be more efficient and become stronger? So Angie and Johnny?
Angie, go ahead.
I'll use a heart rate monitor. I'm a gadget person, so I like to have a
a GPS to tell me how fast I'm going and what distance I've actually traveled, and I love my heart monitor. And so I'll be watching that, checking that heart monitor, and it'll tell me not only whether my horse is gaining in his fitness, but if there's some discomfort. Everybody's been on a horse that maybe has a bellyache and you're wondering why he's really slowing down. So sometimes watching the heart monitor will give you an idea if the horse is kind of goofing off and just doesn't want to go, or if there really is some pain aspect. But I will have a target for my horse's heart rate, not obviously in the first couple of rides, maybe not even for the first month. I'll just get to know that particular horse's heart rate, and then I'll start to target that it gets lower. And I noticed that somebody had asked what brand I use. Right now I'm using a Polar, but I've used them all, VMAX or Garmin, and they're all pretty much the same. I don't think it matters really what brand you're using. But I like to look for a target of, at the walk, I want my horse's pulse to be in the 70s. And again, it depends on the horse. I ride Mustangs, and so their heart rates are going to be naturally higher than an Arab. So some of the Arabians will have a much lower target heart rate, but for my Mustangs, 70s is a good target for the walk. For a flat trot, I'm looking for around 100 to 110. For a good strong uphill climb, and for us, we have some pretty severe hills, so we're looking for around 130. And when I finally get to the point of a canter or a gallop, I'm looking around the 200 range. So those are the targets that I have. But again, I spend some time in that first month or so getting to know that individual horse to see what a safe target would be for him. Johnny, your turn.
So by my training program, you can tell I'm kind of an unstructured type. I'm the same with the watching heart rate and such. I don't ride with a heart rate monitor. When I did, I found, for me, I was so concentrating on it that it was taking away me really thinking about paying attention to how the horse is feeling without the monitor, because they can tell you so much, but for me it was distracting me. So I stopped using them. I do carry a stethoscope. So as I'm getting to that, after the horse is getting out and he's been on the trail, putting in a few more miles, then I will, I have a couple sections of trail that I can ride in our trail system that I'll push them in a canter. It's a very slight grade, up to the top, stop, hop off, and I take their heart rate with a stethoscope, and then I stand there 10 minutes. And just like a PNR, which is also training for them to learn to stand for 10 minutes, and I watch how they're recovering. And so because I've got a few of these different sections, anytime I ride that, I can compare it to a previous time to see if they are recovering quicker. And with the stethoscope, I can also listen to gut sounds and such. But I'm watching for the recovery, but not so much. I'm not worried what they're doing going down the trail. I'm just looking at, if they're recovering quicker, then I know I can start increasing our training rides some, that they're ready for a little more. So I'm kind of simple, basic, lazy probably.
I think it has worked. So, it's, and those I think are great tips. Kay, what is happening to the horses while these ladies are doing their training?
So we want to talk a little bit about the term cardiac output. And cardiac output is the, physiologically, it describes the volume of blood that is being pumped out of the heart. And as the myocardial contraction is the heart's ability to contract. So as the horses are getting fitter, the heart, which is a muscle, contracts, and then it produces more cardiac output. And so as the heart gets more fit, the contractility increases, which leads to more cardiac output. And then eventually, once the horse is getting more fit, it'll decrease the heart rate because the heart doesn't have to beat as many times because it's it's contracting more and getting more oxygen or more blood around the body and more oxygen to the tissues. So, the heart rate, like we all know, is just the number of contractions per minute. And heart rate can vary depending on the body's physiological needs and how well the body is using the oxygen and then excreting carbon dioxide as well. Many factors that can play into this is genetics. We know that different breeds of horses have different physiology and how fit they are, the stress, whether it be temperature or humidity, and then physiological factors can play into that as well, like how well their kidneys are functioning, what the sodium intake is, and even hormones. So there's lots of things that can influence the horse's ability to get more fit. And as they get more fit with this conditioning, with what Johnny is talking about, what Angie's been talking about, the heart itself gets more fit. And as the heart gets more fit, it's pushing more oxygen around to all the tissues in the body. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the parameters that we'll use to see how well your horse is actually getting fit and then showing signs of fatigue.
Well, thank you. That was an excellent picture of how our horses, how their bodies are changing. And so once we have our cardiovascular system fit, and that is rocking and rolling, and now we're getting more oxygen to the musculoskeletal system. Sarah, please, how do you, what are your tips and tricks, and talk all about strengthening the musculoskeletal system, please, ma'am.
Hold on just a second. Okay, so, sorry, am I unmuted? So this is a really broad system. It was hard for me to kind of narrow it down to what I wanted to talk about with this, because it's a very important system, and it's one of those systems that develops from the moment your horse is born. So basically from the time they hit the ground and as they grow into adulthood, this system is developing and getting stronger depending on how they are cared for and how they are kept, if they're stalled versus pasture or paddock, how much activity do they have when they're young to develop that bone structure and develop the tendons and muscles. And with the system, we're talking about, not just muscle and bone, but we're talking about cartilage, tendons, ligaments, the whole system. And that all works together in order to move that horse mechanically. And most of us, I mean, some people are probably breeding their own horses, but I would say most of us are, we're getting what we get. And so it's up to us to try to make that horse as successful as we can. Part of that is knowing that horse's history. So if you're buying a horse from someone, it's really important to ask them, if what they know about that horse's history, how they were raised. Some horses may be coming from, a lot of inactivity and don't have a solid foundation. Some horses, maybe you're buying a horse off of a seasoned competitor and that's a seasoned horse that has a really solid foundation. So knowing as much history as you can is best. If you don't have that history, then you pretty much want to start as if that horse hadn't been ridden in years, if ever, and start them very slow. So, it all ties into the long, slow distance with that and developing that horse. But if they've had a maintained level of fitness, it's a little bit easier to hit the ground running. And just like the cardiovascular system, it's really important to understand the baseline of your horse's musculoskeletal system as well and their condition when you start. So you always want to start from the baseline, and that's where you work from. Some horses, have conformational flaws that you have to work with. that can predispose them to injury. But a lot of these can be mitigated if they're taken care of properly and conditioned properly. And, you know, a lot of that is just, it's good horse care, whether it's chiropractic and especially good hoof care. Hoof care is critical to all of this, especially if they have any kind of conformational flaws that can impact them and, you know, impact the way that whole system functions. And so, you know, one of the things that I do for the horse before I ride, especially if I'm going to be going longer distances and working up speed, is I stretch my horse. I'll stretch my horse before rides, you know, whether I'm stretching and there's different methods for stretching, and I'm not going to go into that because that could be a whole thing on its own. But I do have just a short series of stretches that take less than 5 minutes, you know, when I tack up and get ready to ride, just to kind of help with the range of motion, start to just get those muscles, you know, stretched and moving, just like a human athlete. You know, our horses are athletes in the same way. So making sure to stretch them and warm up that spine and get the muscles moving is so important. So with the long, slow distance training, you know, you really have to take the time to increase the workload because, you know, any kind of riding, no matter what terrain you're on, is going to cause some kind of concussion on the joints, tendons, ligaments. So making sure that you're increasing your distance and speed at a steady rate is really important. In addition to that, it's, you know, because it's not dissimilar to humans. Like if you don't typically exercise and then you think, oh, I think I'm going to go and I'm going to run 3 miles today. You know, you haven't done anything in 5 years, but you're going to go run 3 miles on that first day, and you're just go pound out those miles. You're going to move fast. I mean, imagine how your body would respond. I mean, mine would be screaming and tell me to, you know, probably go to the hospital. And, you know, most likely you'd probably end up with joint issues in the knees, the hips, shin splints. You know, these are just a few things that might, you know, if you were to start out and go 15 to 20 minutes, slow paced walk, and you did this, you know, every day for the first week, and then the next week you walk 30 minutes a day, slow pace, and then you just continue to build, you're building up your stamina, you're building that bone density, you're working those muscles. It's the same thing with your horse. It's really no different. The lucky thing for horses is they tend to maintain what they gain from exercise and their fitness level. They maintain it better than we do on average, but it's the same principle. The other thing is understanding your training surfaces and protecting your horse accordingly. You know, if you're riding mostly dirt trails, or if you're in grassy fields or sandy terrain, you know, or are you limited to road riding? You know, some folks are out in the country, you know, maybe their only riding option is gravel and rock roads. So just, you know, making sure that you're protecting your horse's feet and anything that you need to help protect against concussion, and what you can do to limit that. It's, you know, we all, you know, some people ride rock. You know, if you're in the mountains, you might be riding a lot of rock, and certain areas might have more granite, some places may not. So you might have a mix, but just know your terrain and make sure that you vary it so that horse is not constantly training on a hard surface all of the time, and just vary that. Same thing with like deep mud and deep sand. I mean, here in Nebraska, we encounter a lot of deep mud frequently. So, you know, it's something that you have to be careful. But if you're working in deep sand, it's the same thing that's really strenuous on tendons and ligaments especially. So you want to make sure that you train carefully. And if it's really deep, take it slow. Let that horse really pick its way carefully, because you could really cause problems. I mean, you can lame a horse for a very long time. I did have questions about gait and gaited horses. And I've competed a lot of different gaited breeds over the years, and the most recent horse I competed was a gaited Morgan, and that's the horse that I did Tevis on. And, you know, really it's not any different than training any other horse, and some people will argue with me about that, but really it's not about it's about training for the specific needs of that particular horse. And so, you know, you have different gaits with a gaited horse, of course. But the main thing is to train for the gait and work in the gait that is most consistent and efficient for that horse for long distance, and make sure that you develop that, because that's, you know, you have your gaits like a foxtrot, you know, the rack, or like the Paso gait. They're they're very complex. That takes a lot of different complex motor skills with, you know, muscles, tendons, everything has to work a little bit more in a little more complex fashion than just a 2-beat trot. So it requires a lot more development. You know, I kind of compare it to like a human toddler. Some people are, you know, worry about their horse's gait, especially if it's a younger horse, and why, oh, they're gaited and I really want them to keep their gait. But they're just like a human toddler. You know, it's like asking a little 3-year-old toddler to do, you know, an advanced, you know, lateral scissor step like you have track athletes doing for warm-ups. It's just probably not going to happen. And it's the same thing with a gaited horse. It just takes time for them to develop that gait. But it all goes back to developing that muscular structure around the gait and that muscular condition. And, you know, and you have to do what's going to be best for the horse, you know, and train for what your intent is. The gait may be more comfortable for you to ride as a rider, but long-term, that may not be the best thing for the horse, for their spine, for their muscle. They might fatigue faster. They're going to fatigue faster if they're doing a complex gait as opposed to a simple 2-beat gait. That's like us. I mean, if we're, you know, you think about it, if we're doing, you know, the Mamba dance, it's going to be way more complicated and tiresome than if we're just doing a little 2-step shuffling around the floor. So you have to think about it in that. And a lot of horses, you know, whether they're gaited or non-gaited, you're just looking for consistency in gait. And part of that is the musculoskeletal conditioning, and then developing both sides of the horse. I'm not a veterinarian, but I see a lot of horses. I put my hands on a lot of horses, and I see a lot of horses that are underdeveloped on one side or the other. And, you know, there's a lot of things that can go into that, you know, why they have less muscle on one side. But like with my horses, typically when I've seen that, it's because they've had a subluxation of the spine. And that can usually be taken care of fairly easily with consistent chiropractic care. And then the other thing is just strictly undeveloped. It's training. It's just a deficiency in training. You know, sometimes if we have a dominant side, we tend to train that side a little bit harder with the horse, or if the horse has a preference to a certain side and it's just easier for us to go with that side, we just sort of let it happen instead of, you know, really making a conscious effort to develop both sides. And I mean, I guess just in closing with this section, you know, the musculoskeletal health and development really relies on a holistic approach to care and maintenance. I mean, bottom line, excellent hoof care. Everything starts and ends with the foot. So, you know, hoof health and balance affects the entire musculoskeletal system. If you don't have balance in the foot and it doesn't fit the angle of the horse, it affects every structure from the bottom up. You know, chiropractic care, acupuncture, massage therapy, or Masterson method, you know, there's different body work methods out there, and then diet and targeted supplementation all goes into it. It's a rounded picture. So it's not just about conditioning and training, it's the rounded picture of care and making sure that the spine is in alignment. You know, chiropractic is important, and those are the things that I tend to do with my program. So if you have any questions, let me know. Oh, I see there is one. How quickly does a mature horse lose fitness? Well, I'm going to let Carrie talk about that more because she can go into the actual physiology behind it. What was the question? So the question is, how quickly does a mature horse lose fitness? If a horse is not in regular training for, say, a year, does it take the same amount of time to prepare for a ride or less time?
Oh, so it's pretty interesting. It even can take within 2 days of a horse being, you know, like let's say they've had an injury and they're stalled. Within 2 days, you can start to see changes in their muscle ability and their muscle strength, which will then affect their overall conditioning and endurance. So I think very much if you've had a horse that's out of condition for a year, I think you start back at the very beginning of your program. Now you may end up seeing that, you know, if Angie's program is 16 weeks, if Johnny's program, Sarah's program is more on assessment, you may be able to ramp up your work more quickly because the fitness is going to come back. But I would always start back at square one, and then assess, you know, ride and assess. And when you're assessing, you know, feel the legs, feel the back, check the heart rate, look at your horse's gums, pinch their skin, you know, and know what your horse looks like, know what their baseline is. And as you're seeing that they're coming back, they're looking good. They get back to the trailer, they eat, they drink, they're, you know, acting spry and energetic, and their eyes look nice and bright, you know, you're ready to push the next step. But it is really interesting how quickly their fitness can decline, but also equally as well, it can come back very quickly, so you don't have to just start over every single time. Great
Carrie,
question.
Carrie, I'd also like to put in that it kind of depends on the breed too. What I found that, like, my Arabs maintain their fitness easier than like a big quarter horse does. And it kind of depends on how many years of conditioning the horse had previous. I just rode with a good friend of mine, and of course none of us are competing this year. And she was just totally shocked that her horse was doing as well as he was on the ride that I went with her. And I said, you have to remember that he has 4 years of conditioning underneath him. And so even though she hadn't been riding him a whole lot this year, he still had that underlying conditioning from all those years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
I think that's excellent.
There's a couple more questions. So Kristen asked, if you observe asymmetric muscle development, would you work the underdeveloped side more, or try to be conscientious about working both equally? I personally work them equally, because it's hard to find a balance if you're not working them equally. It might take a little bit longer, but I don't know, Carrie, what else would you add to that?
You know, first I would, you know, go ahead and check everything that is before we just jump to conditioning. Let's make sure that, you know, it's, you know, first check with your veterinarian. Let's make sure that we're not having, you know, a situation, an anatomical problem, you know, that we have something physically wrong. Make sure we don't have something physically wrong in the foot. Check your saddle, you know, and see where your saddle fit is. And then once you've kind of checked off the boxes that the asymmetry is from, you know, just preference on the left lead versus the right, then start working. I know for my own horses in the past, I have had to, once I see asymmetry, you know, start working that opposite side more, the weakened side more, just to kind of let it catch up with the overdeveloped side. Okay, and Johnny, Angie, what else?
I'd like to address the asymmetry in the arena. I do a lot of circling, a lot of pole work, a lot of cavaletti work, and I'll address that before I ever get out on the trail, and then use the trail to help continue that, you know, building and fixing that.
There's 2 more questions that were posted. Donna asked, when training, do you include all of the equipment or baggage that you plan to compete with? I absolutely do. I train with everything that I will be carrying in competition, so that the weight stays similar.
You also want to make sure that all that equipment is fitting right. You're not getting rubs, that it's not bouncing. So yeah, absolutely. I ride with way too much stuff, but I do it at home too.
And if anybody on the trail, I actually carry more, because I tend to carry like a saw or a chainsaw or something. So
Yeah.
I tend to have more weight on my poor horse when I'm conditioning.
I have never carried a chainsaw on my horse.
Mine learn early.
Carolyn also had a question. She asked, is there such a thing as overconditioning or riding for an event? And if so, what should you look for?
Would that be in our fatigue section coming up?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll just, Carolyn, you'll have to wait a few minutes. And before we leave musculoskeletal, I just wanted to kind of touch a little bit about what the changes are that are happening. So first off, we have the bones, and the bones that are, you know, so our legs, our spine, the bones are going to become stronger to reduce the amount of strain on the body. And it is pretty interesting, because the more speed work you do, that is what's going to really put stress on the bones. They've done, of course, our speed work is really assessed in standardbreds, thoroughbreds, and quarter horses. And kind of through the research I was looking through, you know, we do a lot of long trotting, but until we start, you know, packing in some speed, we don't really see the bone start to grow, change, and become more dense. The cartilage, there's, you know, we have the bones, and then at the very end of the bones is, you know, where we're going to see joints meet, is where we're going to have this protective connective tissue layer, and that is called the cartilage. And cartilage is, you know, once it's gone, it's gone. I don't know about y'all's knees, but sometimes I wonder, and I think mine's gone. But the you know, the cartilage is protected through joint fluid that is within those joints, and we can help increase joint fluid. Good movement, locomotion, that's going to allow for joint fluid to kind of lubricate those joints and help. And so joint fluid is something that you can help with your training. The joint fluid itself and the joints, they serve kind of as nutrition for the cartilage itself. Once we move away from bone, then we start to move to ligaments. And ligaments are actually the connective tissue that connect bone to bone. And they are what's going to create our joint stability. So a lot of times if we're looking at fetlocks, that's where we're going to have, you know, if you have some weak ligaments, that's where you're going to see it is kind of down in the pasterns in your fetlocks. These ligaments are really tough, fibrous bands of connective tissue, and they're designed to help support the joints so that we're not seeing the bones get out of alignment. The ligaments can certainly become stronger, and we have seen through moderate exercise and studies that over time you can increase actually your ligament strength, size, and there's this molecule called collagen. We think of collagen, but collagen is you know, in the ligaments, and that actually can allow for a little elasticity. So exercise actually can increase the strength of your ligaments, which I think is cool. So bone and ligaments can really be changed. Cartilage, you get what you get. Tendons, unfortunately, you kind of get what you get on them. The tendons actually have pretty limited capacity, and we think of, you know, the superficial digital flexor tendons, right? Everybody doesn't want to bow a tendon. And so tendons, they are going to have a limited capacity to adapt to exercise. They have limited capacity for repair, but gosh, they can be susceptible to injury. So tendons, they're going to develop in response to the loading patterns on the horses. And these loading patterns, it's kind of neat. They actually start developing as soon as, you know, a horse is born, they're full, and their feet touch the ground. That's when we start seeing the tendons developing. They get used to the pattern of the horse moving, and that's where their weight-bearing loads are going to develop. So they're a little bit more tricky. And then that's it. So typically, if we're thinking of exercise is going to have the most effect on muscle and the muscle development. So that's our kind of our final one, right, of the musculoskeletal system. So muscle is going to respond fairly quickly to increasing exercise demands by getting larger, by getting stronger, because that's the part that probably is most sore when we're training. And so our body's going to have an immediate response to it. It's also the first thing to go when we're looking at, you know, a horse that's having time off, or, you know, if they've potentially been overtrained and we're having to rest, you're going to start to see that muscle atrophy fairly quickly. But the cool thing is it can also come back fairly quickly. So bone, muscle, you know, even a little bit of ligament, that's your use it or lose it type of principle. The muscle finally as well is going to be with conditioning. That's your critical piece for getting your power, your stamina, your forward speed. And that is definitely, I think, the end result when we've done all of this training is to see your horse be able to be forward and, you know, go rock and roll for, you know, however many miles you would like to go down the road. So that's about it for that system.
Carrie, there's 2 questions posted. Kristen asked, I feel like it is better for the horse's back to use shoulder packs than one on the cantle, but most riders seem to put more weight on the back. Is that okay? Do they just need to train for that, or is putting weight on the shoulder better?
Who wants to tackle that one?
Well, I can only go from personal experience, having horses that, my Mustangs tend to be short back, but I feel like if I put the weight behind the cantle, you know, the horse carries 60% of their weight in the front half and 40% in the back half. I feel like if I put much weight behind the cantle, I'm overweighting the back half. So I tend to keep it, if I'm going to carry any weight, I tend to keep it over the horse's shoulder. Just because that's, to me, the horse is better balanced that way.
And I use both pommel and cantle packs, and I've never really worried about the weight. And I carry a lot of water on the hot rides, 128 ounces total. So it's divided front and back. So the weight I don't worry about, but I make sure that we don't have bounce. I think that you're going to have more issues if you've got bouncing packs that are either rubbing or constantly slamming into them because your water bottles are smacking the back of the saddle. That would probably irritate them more than the actual weight. But I think really it gets down to personal preference with the rider, as long as they're well fitted on the saddle.
Donna had a question about supplements, but Donna, I think it would be best if you emailed me your question and I will forward it on to Kay and Carrie to talk about, just because that's a big topic in and of itself.
Right. I'd like to say something briefly about that. I blood test my horse at the beginning of a ride season and then again mid-season. So then any supplements I might use are addressed based on what I got out of having the blood test done.
Idea.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for all the questions. We really appreciate it and want to make it definitely very interactive. So now kind of for, you know, what I feel is, you know, we have all this information, but really at the end of the day, how do we know if our horse is fit? And how can we assess fitness and if they're ready to go on? And how can we assess for fatigue? And when is it time to take a break? So let's talk about fitness first. And Angie, would you like to lead off?
Again, I'm an arena rider. I do arena work during the week and trail work on the weekends. So one of the first things I look for is the core strength in my horse. And so in the arena, I'll be looking for how well he backs up, how easily he backs up on the trail, maybe how easily he backs uphill. Will he go ahead and go over pole work easily? So I'm looking for that core strength and comparing it to, you know, what I saw early in the season. I'm also looking for willingness to continue when we're on the trail. You know, how is this something he's enjoying or is he not enjoying? I'm looking at the speed that they're offering to go rather than what I'm asking them to go. Is the horse willing to eat and drink on the trail? And then for me, post-ride, I'm looking for muscle soreness, back soreness, not only immediately post-ride, but the next day. And then the same with the legs. I'm very particular about my horse's legs. I spend more time probably actually on the legs than I do on the rest of the body. So I spend a lot of time getting to know my horse's legs, and I'm looking for any kind of change in the leg, any heat or any fill, immediately post-ride, a half an hour post-ride, and then the next day. So that's a big point for me, is to watch their legs. And I put probably, what did I put, 7,500 miles on my horse and only ever had, I think, one time where we had a leg issue. So the legs are a big deal for me. Johnny?
Oh, no, this is Sarah next.
Oh, Sarah, sorry.
Well, I'm not going to drag it on because my program, what I look for is almost spot on identical to Angie's. I mean, I look for the same things, and I am constantly looking at that horse's, not just their, obviously I'm going to look at the heart rate and, respiratory recovery within different types of exercise. But yes, I look over every inch of that horse's body constantly through that training process, especially as I'm getting closer to competition, because, it's really, we tend to, we talked about overtraining, but, and that'll come later, we'll talk about that a little bit, but it's easy to think, oh, that competition's coming up, I need to push a little bit harder, I don't feel like I quite did enough here, and that's usually when we take it too far, and that's usually when I back off and I let that horse rest. But I take a look at the same things that Angie's looking at, and I'm constantly on those legs and I'll wrap the legs, hose the legs after every workout, and really take time to just care for the legs, because if you don't have that, everything else is going to fall apart. Like I do actually keep a training checklist when especially if I have a very specific goal. So when I was training for Tevis, I had a very specific checklist of certain elements of training that I wanted to make sure that I hit with the horse. And, because I wanted to ensure a really diverse program. I mean, I'm from Nebraska, we don't have mountains. And to go to California and do a mountainous ride, you have to get creative in how you train a horse. And so I did, I would haul 45 minutes away to where there were some really good steep bluff hills, some place where Angie was talking about and Johnny were talking about with the PNRs being awful. And so I did a lot of not only my climbing training there, but I did my heat training, a lot of heat and humidity training there. And it sounds sort of counterintuitive for training to go out in the middle of the day, but that's the best time to train. Once you have a certain fairly high level of fitness, to take it to the next level, you need to be able to train in that heat and take that system to the next level. So I just had a checklist, and maybe that's something that you would find helpful. And then within that checklist, you're able to kind of assess the horse's parameters and what you've achieved, and if you've achieved what you needed to in order to go on that ride, whatever it may be. So, and just look for deficiencies.
All right. Some of the things that I wanted to bring up that I use is stamina. Is my horse fit? That he can keep up his stamina, whether that's aerobic fitness, both in heart rate recovery as well as respiratory recovery. So I think it's really important to know what your horse's resting heart rate is. And so then once you've pushed them, they've climbed a hill, you've done a lot of trot work, then when you do stop, does the heart rate drop to a resting recovery rate? And that'll tell you how fit your horse is becoming. Also with your muscular strength. We do a lot of climbing in Colorado. But are they willing to climb? Are they stopping more frequently? Are they, can you get to the top of the hill now in one stop? And that is all as they're getting more and more fit. Are they able to do that on their own without a lot of pushing them? Things I like to look for in post-ride is, again, like we talked about, the legs, especially the fill in the tendons. We've all seen that, even us, if we've hiked too far, and later you fill in the feel, you got the ankle thing going on, the horses can get that too. Heat as well, looking for any sort of injury. Post-ride, how's their appetite? Do I get back to the trailer and the horse is jumping right into that hay bag, or are they reluctant to eat because they've become fatigued? Thirst, are they drinking that water and keeping themselves hydrated? And then gut sounds, of course, is something that I've always watched for, just to make sure that my horse is staying fit during, that my horse is fit and I'm not asking him to do too much.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, ladies. Johnny, what are parameters that you assess for fatigue?
So Sarah and Kate covered most of them, which is awesome. On the trail, the things that I would look for, lack of enthusiasm, when I've brought my horse down to a walk and I want to trot again, I expect them to pick that trot up with just my giving one little cluck, no leg. If they pick it up right away, I know that we're still good. Now, if they say, I want to walk some more, that's telling me he's getting a little tired and he needs to walk a bit more and rest. But that enthusiasm of them going down the trail is mentioned. Out on the trail, are they starting to pass on grabbing bites of grass if you've got an area they can graze? Are they tripping, overreaching, forging? All signs of them getting really tired and they get lazy with their feet. You look at their eyes, and are they starting to get a kind of a dull, vacant look? And then when after the ride, to see if we've done too much, as mentioned, checking the back for soreness, the legs, look them over. Are they tight? Do they get fill? Is there heat? And then the overall to show, someone asked about, can you condition too much? And there's an overall, is your horse losing too much weight? They need some weight to go into these rides. So he may be a lean, mean fighting machine, all muscle, but they need to have some weight on there. And you start pounding them too much and they'll lose that base weight. And I think that's another sign of you're just pushing them a little beyond that. You think you're doing good by more rides must be better, but they need rest. Carrie can explain what the body does at rest to heal itself from the rides, but they need rest just as much sometimes as they need the conditioning. And if you think the weekend before your upcoming ride, you're going to put more conditioning on that horse, you're not. If he's not in condition a week before the ride, that's it. So, don't be pounding him coming into these rides a week or 2 weeks before. Do some easy rides so they come in, ready to take on what you're asking them to do. But, you've got that, what your horse's overall look is. And some people need to take a picture of them beginning of the season. And I do this. I take a side shot of my horse at the beginning of the season so I can compare how he's looking overall as we're getting fit, because we don't always see it as they're changing because we see them every day. And sometimes it takes a friend to say, wow, he sure lost a lot of weight, hasn't he? And you kind of stand back and go, oops, yeah. So, Carrie?
Yeah, excellent. So one, fatigue in itself is the body's, this is a normal consequence of exercise and stress. So, and it's the body's kind of safety mechanism so that we don't allow harm. And so certainly we know can sometimes think of fatigue as being really dangerous, right? Because if they start to crash, if they've gotten to that point of exhaustion, then that's a horse that needs to be on IV fluids, may need some, has developed thumps, like a serious electrolyte imbalance. So when I'm thinking of us talking about fatigue, what are our subtle signs that we can look at so that we don't get to those dangerous signs of fatigue? And I think once our horses are, willing to work for us, they're probably going to try to work through it because we've asked them. So I think when they're looking, or when I'm thinking of a horse that's having fatigue, respiratory, cardiovascular, and metabolic responses are all pretty, that's the things that we have factual knowledge about. For race horses, they've been able to put them on treadmills and then push them to fatigue and assess. So they've got that type of data that is out there. We typically see that when they're hitting the point of fatigue, they're not able to maintain the same speed. So that's been said multiple times, and I 100% agree. I think some of the earliest signs are failure to cool down. If you've built up that good sweat, sweat is great for cooling off. It cools off the heat that the horse has built, but the sweat is also a source of dehydration for the horse. So if we've built up that good sweat and then you're now, cooling down walking and they are still sweating and they're drying off, that is a great visual parameter right there that your horse, you need to check yourself. I think at the same time, if you've got your persistent heart rate, respiratory rate, and something that we don't necessarily check for in NATRC, but I think is a good thing, is go ahead and check temperatures. If you've worked your horse hard, you've built up this heat, and their body temperature is staying elevated, again, you're starting to hit that point of fatigue. So just to touch on when rest, and yes, you totally can overtrain your horse. Johnny nailed it. If they start to lose weight, the other thing is you start to see appetite go and gut sounds go. I think that's definitely a sign that you've overtrained as well, because the body no longer has the resources to continue to give the extra energy. So, and if you've overtrained, the only way to recover is to give them a good rest, and rest, see when their weight's coming up, their appetite, and then ease back into your exercise and figure out where your fitness plan is again. When your horse is at rest, they've got huge amounts of cell regeneration that's happening. So, rest is not a bad thing. Rest is not, your muscle might start, we know muscle on a couple days of rest is going to, start to waste tiny bit, but we also know that it's going to come back pretty quick. So when we're resting, you're going to get your cell regeneration that's happening, in your gut, in your heart, in the lungs, in your tendons and your ligaments that are going to be repairing. And that's like, equal to our good sleep and our good rest that we need. It's just your horse can't tell you what their willingness to, when they need that. And I think also watch their poop. When they're getting fatigued, you're pretty much going to see a change on their poop as well. Some horses, it may become loose, some it may become hard, but I think that is also just a telltale sign that you can look at. Anything else, ladies? No? Do you have any more questions?
There was another question here that just talked about, is there a good guide for having periods off of training for recovery? And I do like that general guide of, like, if you do a 60-mile weekend, that you give them 6 days rest before, going back to hard training. Now, in those 6 days, you may end up doing some in-hand work or some arena work or something, but giving them time to rest and recuperate from a hard ride.
Going back, Mary had a question about ligament injuries, and she asked is it possible to bring a horse back to competitive fitness after a ligament injury, and she was specific about like a 23% tear.
Oh goodness. So I would have to definitely go do some very specific research on a 23% tear. But I feel like a horse's body has incredible healing capacity. And so, and I think sometimes given proper rest and being compliant with your veterinarian, I think is probably one of the biggest things that we can see on recovery. Being a veterinarian, I know I've sometimes not been as compliant as what I should have been on recovery. It's hard, and it's hard to be patient sometimes. So, I think also between different medications that are out there, IV Legend, Equine, things that, gosh, now we have stem cell therapy, that is in horses. I think we have agents and treatments out there that can allow healing and create, an environment for healing. I think sometimes it is, if it just proper rest is also it, but I think it depends on what your veterinarian says. Again, I'm not sure specifically. I'd probably have to have a little bit more case information and then do research and that's a great email question. But, we've had horses that have certainly recovered from injury, such as ligament and tendon damage, that have gone on to have some amazing feats. Ladies, what are your suggestions on this?
Work with your
I
veterinarian.
can speak to Tate, whoever sent this on. I mean, he had lot of struggle with a tendon injury in 2017, and it took, you didn't even really know what we were working with or what the issue was, and it took a while to just even get that diagnosed. And that's what's hard, is when you don't know what you're dealing with. You know that there's an issue, but you can't find it. And so it took, him having a really stressful ride, and then having the vet there immediately upon return to ultrasound that, the legs and understand. And that's when we found the lesion on his tendon. And so we knew exactly what we were doing and how to treat it. And we did the shockwave therapy, and we did a lot of different things and a lot of it was just time. It was just a lot of time and care. And then I had to bring him back with hand walking, did a lot of hand walking for a long time. And then slow riding, just literally for 15 to 20 minutes of just walking under saddle. And that was it. And just slowly building him back up. And then the following summer, then we were able to pick up training as he healed and strengthened. And we did Tevis the following summer and completed. So it can be done. It doesn't always work that way, and it is hard. It's like Carrie said, it's so hard to be patient, especially when you have goals. You have big goals and you know what you want to do with your horse. Gosh, Kay has her own story about, you talk about your horse, about Colton.
And my horse unfortunately had an injury and has had his pastern fused twice. And so it took a lot of giving it time to heal, and then bringing it back slowly, and then, competing on him and seeing if it was even going to hold up. And knock on wood, so far he's held up, and hopefully Tevis will be in his future someday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
But it really does just depend on the individual, I think. We'd have to know more about the specific case, and I don't mind, Carrie said, let's get some more of the history, and even getting records from the veterinarian. I wouldn't mind reading through those and just giving you my advice. And I can get there's some very talented equine veterinarians out there that are very much into diagnosis and rehab.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Excellent. Well, first, got to throw it out there. There's an NATRC mileage challenge. So for all of your conditioning that everybody is doing, we want to see pictures, progress, hear how it's going. I think even hearing about where horses are coming up in fitness, or where you've identified fatigue. We're all in this together, and we want to hear about how this is going for you and what your stories are. And then finally, I just want to throw out our NATRC email. So for questions that you have, but maybe didn't feel comfortable putting in the chat box, or, you think about them a little bit later, please reach out to us. And I just want to say, ladies, this was a blast. It was great fun, and I hope that we get to do this again. And just to everybody, and especially to NATRC, and to everybody that's bringing these webinars, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie, for heading this up.